Welcome to the next session of the grade 11 syllabus that we're going to be discussing, and that is the last knowledge strand, and that is environmental studies. Now, lots of learners actually find environmental studies to be a challenging topic because lots of essays and hypothesis testing is based on this particular topic, but we are going to look at each aspect so that it covers everything that deals with hypothesis, that deals with essays in a very structured manner. Today we're going to be looking at the impact of pollution on the environment. From the last session, we looked at one of the human influences on the environment was pollution. Now we're going to look at the key concepts that deals with the impact of pollution on the environment. We can now look at what is pollution. It can also be asked as define pollution. What is pollution? We can define pollution as being an undesirable change in the physical, that is the structure, the biological properties, that is how it is actually the elements of the air, the water, right, and the soil, what impact it has on us, so that is the biological properties of it, as well as the chemical properties that would change. So pollution is basically an undesirable change in the physical, chemical or biological properties of air, soil and water. We now look at the types of pollution, and obviously the types of pollution is affecting the air itself, the water and the land, and we see it all around us. The actual pollution that is increasing on our earth is a threat to mankind. It's the very threat to our future existence. And there has to be a need for a solution to be involved to get rid of the pollution. Right. One of the strategies was the Kyoto Protocol, which was an agreement signed in a country in Japan, whereby a lot of countries came together and they participated in this agreement to reduce the number of carbon dioxide emissions or gas emissions that contribute to global warming and the greenhouse effect, as discussed in the previous session. Right, so again, just to remind you what the Kyoto Protocol is, it is an international agreement because it's a lot of countries that came together, that industrialized countries have signed in 1997 to reduce the greenhouse gases, to reduce air pollution. We will look at some of the greenhouse gases later when we discuss air pollution. However, USA has not accepted this agreement. Now, what does this mean? It means that USA, as a large industrialized area, is the largest contributor of the greenhouse gases and the largest contributor of air pollution. We now go to look at the next part of it, and we want to find out what are the two types of pollutants. Now, in the grade 12 exam, environmental studies was previously in the 2008 and the 2009, right, and the 2010 March papers. There was environmental studies. The syllabus has now changed. So if you want to find more questions on environmental studies, you've got to refer to the previous 2008, 2009, March 2010, grade 12 papers. A lot of learners had problems on defining the types of pollutants. Now you have a degradable. The word degradable means it can be broken down naturally and artificially. Example, sewage. Sewage or feces or organic matter such as the peels of the vegetable or vegetable litter can be broken down. That is degradable. However, if I add the word biodegradable, I now am saying that this matter can be broken down by means of bacteria or microorganisms as well as fungi. Non-degradable simply means when something cannot be broken down either artificially or Bibacterial means it cannot be broken down. For example, plastic. It is the biggest polluter. Plastic, polystyrene, they cannot be degraded or broken down in the environment. Therefore, they serve as a permanent source of pollution. Let's look at non-degradable. It cannot be broken down either naturally, that's by bacteria or sunlight, or artificially. Example, plastic and mercury, even polystyrene. So when you throw your polystyrene cups and polystyrene containers after visiting a takeaway, please do not dispose of this onto the road. It's a permanent form of land pollution. It needs to be sent into a proper dumping site or into a proper bin where it can be recycled. We will discuss some of that later. We're now going to look at the sources of air pollution. There are various sources of air pollution, and please let not the sources of air pollution be confused with the effects of air pollution. So we're going to see what actually is the cause of air pollution. What is the source? Where does air pollution come from? What is contributing to air pollution? The first one is factories. Right. We're going to look at factories, and then we're going to see how do factories actually contribute to air pollution, factories and industries. We're going to look at vehicles, and we find there's a number of vehicles on the road which causes traffic congestion because there are less people using public transport. More people are using their very own vehicles, contributing to air pollution. We're going to see that later. Power stations, example Eskom and Sesol, are also contributors of air pollution. The burning of wood and coal, as well as felt fires. Right. We find that in winter, somehow a lot of people start burning felt fires, and this is a major contribution to air pollution and a major contribution to global warming. So even the burning of wood, coal and felt fires actually contributes to air pollution. The decomposition of waste. You find on the highways every day there will be dead dogs lying around, right? There will be dumps of litter illegally dumped, and as this decomposes, it contributes to air pollution. This high level of air pollution is actually due to the high amounts of the carbon footprint. Now, what is a carbon footprint? It's the amount of carbon that one individual releases into the air every day. And you would say, but I do not release carbon. But the more electricity you use, remember, the more coal has to be burnt, the more CO2 is released into the air. So you are actually contributing to the carbon levels in the atmosphere. We are now going to look at the effects of air pollution. The first effect is that there's an increase in respiratory diseases. Right, what are respiratory diseases? This is a question often asked in an exam, and most of the learners do get it right. So what are respiratory diseases? They are actually bronchitis, pneumonia, emphysema. Emphysema is normally caused by cigarette smoking, but remember, the air pollutants worsen emphysema. Lung cancer as well is caused by some of the air pollutants that are carcinogenic. Carcinogenic means cancer-causing pollutants. Right, so that's the effects of air pollution, increase in respiratory diseases, the slowing down of plant growth affecting food crops and seed germination. Now, in the last session, we had looked at how germinating seeds are affected by the changes in the pH. And you know that as more sulfuric acid or sulfur dioxide is actually released into the air, it forms sulfurous acid, which brings about acid rain. And then obviously that sulfur dioxide, which is the air pollutant, is now coming down as rain onto the seeds and which slows down their germination. It will slow down the growing of crops. It will slow down the growing of sprouting of flowers. So air pollution is having an effect not only on human health but also on plants themselves. And you know that we depend on plants for our very existence. We depend on plants not only for oxygen but also for food. So therefore, indirectly, air pollution is affecting the very existence of life. It's threatening life itself. Depletion of the ozone due to CFCs. Remember the aerosols and the propellants, the canned propellants that we use that release CFCs, which last forever in the atmosphere? Well, they are depleting the ozone layer as well. It's also part of air pollution. Now, as early as last week, which is the first week in October, September, October, the scientists have actually discovered a hole in the ozone layer over the Arctic region. Now, do you remember there was a hole that was discovered over the Antarctic region? Now, a hole in the ozone has been discovered over the Arctic region, which means that the CFCs are still continuing depleting the ozone layer, still damaging the O3 molecule. Global warming. The increase in the amount of CO2 is going to obviously cause global warming, and we can see the effects on the climate change. We can see climate change is a direct result of global warming, and global warming is a direct result of the increase in the CO2 levels. Pollution or air pollution is actually upsetting the balance of oxygen and CO2. And this upset in the gas balance of oxygen and CO2 is a major contributor of diseases, because most of the good bacteria actually thrive. They need bacteria to decompose certain nutrients. So bacteria, the useful ones, require oxygen. And if there's a depletion in oxygen and there's an increase in CO2, you find that decomposition is going to slow down. There's going to be an increase in pollution. We are going to be inhaling more carbon dioxide rather than oxygen, and that can cause the death of life itself. So let us just revise again once more the effects of air pollution. Increase in respiratory diseases, slowing down of plant growth affecting food crops, depletion of the ozone, global warming due to increased CO2 levels, and upsetting the levels of oxygen and CO2, whereby CO2, which is supposed to be 0.04% in the atmosphere, is now going to increase to about 5%, and the oxygen, which is supposed to have been 21%, is now going down to about 15%. And obviously, these levels, once they change, will affect life itself. We are going to look at some of the possible solutions to air pollution. This is normally a very famous question asked as part of an essay, as part of a short paragraph question: the effects of air pollution, the sources of air pollution, and what are the possible solutions to air pollution. Right, we're going to look at the first one. Impose heavy fines or penalties. Please, learners, when you are talking about imposing fines, remember, imposing fines is one, and imposing penalties goes as one concept. So you cannot say imposing fines and then on the next line impose penalties. You would only get 1 mark. It means one and the same thing. So government needs to actually impose fine on those perpetrators who do not adhere to the environmental acts. So we need to impose heavy fines or penalties on factories who do not adhere to legislations like the Environmental Act, the Clean Air Act. Yes, you get an act called the Clean Air Act. They need to adhere to this. They need to monitor their carbon dioxide emissions. And if not, they have to actually pay heavy penalties. Right. The next one, government to improve public transport. As we said earlier, that vehicles are a source of air pollution. What is the source? Carbon monoxide. which is a very, very poisonous gas if it's inhaled in large quantities into our body. We're going to deal with that a little bit more later. But if the government can improve public transport like the cow train, make a cow train available from all sectors of the society to get to places, then there'll be less traffic, and obviously we can reduce the amount of CO2 released into the atmosphere, and this will have a less of a negative impact on human health and plant growth. So, improved public transport. Cars use unleaded petrol. This has already started in our country in 2003, whereby cars have now, most of the motorists are using unleaded petrol, because lead itself released into the atmosphere can cause cancer to the lungs. So, use of unleaded petrol. Catalytic converters to convert nitrous oxide into harmless nitrogen and oxygen. Now, the new cars that have formed are a little bit more expensive because they have what we call a catalytic converter. It converts the nitrous oxide found in petrol into harmless nitrogen and oxygen, so that it does not interfere with the air itself. It does not add pollutants to the air. Use alternative sources of energy. Now, what do we mean by alternative sources of energy? We are looking at cheaper, or not cheaper, rather like cleaner sources of energy, like your solar energy, your wind energy. These do not actually contribute to pollution. So we are going to, the government must now look at alternative sources of energy. For example, every new home that needs to be built must be installed with a solar geyser, because as we know, geysers actually use up a lot of electricity, which requires more coal to be burned, producing more carbon dioxide. So let's just revise these effects one more time. The solutions one more time. Possible solutions to air pollution. You impose heavy fines. Government to improve public transport. Use unleaded petrol. Catalytic converters to convert nitrous oxide into harmless nitrogen and oxygen. Use alternative sources of energy. And we can also add, formulate legislations. So if there are no laws or legislations, they can formulate legislations and then make sure that the industries actually adhere to this. So formulate legislations. Legislations are also laws or acts. We're now going to water pollution. Right, we're going to look at the sources of water pollution, a question often asked as an essay question in the last section C of your exam paper, and this is what you need to focus on. What are the sources of water pollution? Right, we're going to look at the main source is sewage. Now, if you look at our country itself, there are a lot of immigrants that have come into our country, and because of the increase in the population of our country, the amount of sewage that is released on a daily basis is very high. So government and municipality cannot cope with actually implementing proper sanitation systems in every sector of the society. So sewage has become a problem. The pipes are bursting, or there is direct deposition of sewage into our rivers and dams. So burst pipes, direct deposition of sewage into the rivers, as well as the droppings of animals that come from subsistence farm, like the cow dung, the droppings of dogs, right? These also the droppings from baby nappies that is just thrown onto the fells. These actually wash off and run into the rivers. So sewage is basically the feces or droppings of animals that gets into the water systems. Detergents. If you look at detergents, what are detergents? It is your domestos, your soap, your washing powders that are not environmental friendly, and when they get into the environment, they actually change the pH, because detergents are more alkali. They change the pH of the soil. They will then destroy the useful bacteria we have in our soil, and this actually creates an imbalance in the ecosystems. So detergents is another source That means where is water pollution? Detergents, sewage. Right, litter, a whole lot of litter. Right, you can have a beautiful environment, a beautiful park, right, a beautiful sea, but it is completely unsightly to see cans rolling onto your foot with the waves. It is unsightly and intolerable to see a piece of plastic getting onto the head of a bird. Yes, it is the cause of human littering. Litter is being thrown out of the cars. As long as the cars are clean, litter is thrown onto the roads, onto the parks, into the river, onto the sea, and without thinking further, where is that piece of litter going to travel? So litter like papers, cans, plastics, polystyrene, these contribute to making the environment aesthetically unattractive, completely unattractive. Oil, right? Why is oil? Where does oil come from? It's definitely not the cooking oil. In fact, sometimes it is. People drain off the cooking oil into the soil. When they've used up cooking oil and they throw it into the soil, remember that cooking oil clogs the soil particles, so no plants can actually grow there. Right? Another major cause of water pollution is the oil spills, like in the Gulf of Mexico. The oil spills that come from the tankers, right, has a major effect on the aquatic plants and bird life. The feathers get clogged with oil. So oil comes from the ship tankers, that is the crude oil. Right, pesticides. With the increase in population, farmers need to grow more food. He needs to produce a high yield of maize or wheat so that he can get a good turnover. And there comes the pests like the locusts and the rats that feed on his food crops. So what is he going to do? He's going to buy pesticides, spray them, toxic fumes rise into the air, also causing air pollution. And there comes the rain. And then what happens? All the pesticides get washed off into the nearest river, lake, dam, and eventually end up into the sea. So pesticides are a source of water pollution. And eventually, it's going to get into the food chain and affect man himself. Fertilizers. Right, as much as fertilizers are useful for plant growth, you find that fertilizers themselves, once there's an excess of fertilizer, they get into the soil, wash off into the dams, and that fertilizer is a nutrient for the little algae that is found in the lake. The algae use the nitrates and sulfates and phosphates found in fertilizer, and there's an overgrowth of algae, rapid increase in growth, causing what we call an algal bloom. And that you're going to see is going to affect the oxygen and CO2 levels. We're going to look at that a little later. Mining waste as well. Hot water from the mining industry, that is thermal pollution, gets into the water, and hot water drives out the oxygen, killing the fish in that lake and river. So mining is another contributor of water pollution. Industrial waste. You have lots of industries. Most of the mines and industries is a main contributor to water pollution, and they release hot water into the rivers and dams, as well as toxic chemicals like mercury, cadmium, lead. These actually get into the water, killing fish and plants. Now we look at the effects of water pollution. So remember, when you are constructing a mini essay or writing a short paragraph, do not confuse effects with solutions and solutions with the sources or causes. Let there be clear paragraphs of causes and sources, effects, solutions. So you start each paragraph with a different theme, and that is where the whole essay itself becomes coherent, and you get marks for synthesis. Remember, synthesis means how coherent is your essay? Is it flowing? What does this paragraph deal with? What does the next paragraph deal with? So you got to ensure that if your facts are flowing, you get a full 3 marks for synthesis. We now go on to the effects of water pollution. Right. Diseases. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. These are the diseases that come about from drinking contaminated water. What does the word contaminated mean? It means that that resource is packed with unhealthy and harmful bacteria that you're going to consume. So people who live in the poorest sectors of society, who do not have fresh water accessible to them, probably go and fetch water from a river or dam, and nearby the river there are little informal rural settlements whereby there's poor sanitation, and then the feces get washed into the river. The water may look clean, but there are obviously microorganisms, you cannot see it with the naked eye, they need to be seen under the microscope. These microorganisms get into your digestive system. And what do they cause? They cause severe diarrhea and high fever, whereby there are mucus and blood in the stools. So cholera, typhoid, and dysentery are diseases which can actually result in death because people die of dehydration with the amount of stools that are being passed. Clogging of the gills of fish. Right, there are fish that are swimming. The oil from the oil spills of tankers gets into the gills, clogs up the blood vessels, no oxygen gets into the fish, and you find a whole lot of fish floating onto that water. Fish that are found dead floating in an aquatic ecosystem simply means that there's no oxygen in that water. The water is contaminated. Oil on the feathers of aquatic birds. If you look at the program 50/50, National Geographic, you find there are people, the environmentalists, who actually voluntarily go and feed the little birds, help to remove the oil from the feathers and grow them up until they are adult enough to lay the eggs. Because remember, once the feathers of the birds are clogged, they die, and eventually it can lead to extinction of that bird species. So oil on the feathers of aquatic birds, right, and leading to death. Suffocation of aquatic animals. Often you find the whales will come and lay themselves on the shore because plastics actually get into the mouth of the whale, gets into the digestive system, and the whale's body is now tricked into thinking that the whale is quite full. Meanwhile, the whale is not full with food, it's filled with plastic, and then the whale will eventually not eat for several days, die, and you find the whales come and land themselves onto the shore. Lots and lots of whales, and then you find birds coming to prey. The people are cutting the whales for soap. So litter is a direct cause of the death of numerous useful animals. So they suffocate. The death of the whales, the swallowing of plastics, eutrophication, algal bloom from fertilizers. As we spoke about the algal bloom, that the more fertilizer the farmer uses, that is why they say it is a waste to use a lot of fertilizer, because it gets washed into the sea, and then we have algal bloom. Now this word, eutrophication, it comes out in the biological term whereby they say the deposition of excess fertilizer causing algal bloom. Now you've got to give one word for that, and that will be eutrophication. What does it mean? We will see. We will come to that question a little later in the session. Affecting of the food chains, DDT, mercury levels. Remember, DDT and mercury are toxic chemicals, and once they get into the food chains, that is from the producer to the primary consumer, to the secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, all the animals in that food chain are now becoming affected, because DDT is a pesticide that increases in the fatty tissue of an animal. Right, so once the DDT is washed into the river and dam, and once it gets into the fish, into the gills of the fish, and here comes the fish eagle which feeds on the fish, the DDT gets into the fatty tissue of the fish eagle. Once the fish eagle lays its eggs, the eggshells break before the little nestlings are actually going to be hatching, and that leads to the extinction eventual extinction of that eagle. Right, man enjoys his hobby is fishing. He goes fishing, he catches the fish, not realizing that in the body or in the fatty tissue of the fish is DDT. Man consumes the fish. Once the DDT gets into the bloodstream of man, it goes directly into the fatty tissue of man, accumulates there, causing cancer. So eventually DDT is going to affect the food chain. It's going to affect every living organism in the food chain. It starts off with man, it will end up with man, killing man himself. Right, aesthetically unattractive. Aesthetically unattractive means that the beauty of that environment, of that aquatic ecosystem is destroyed. It's no more beautiful. Nobody feels like putting their feet in and just playing around in the water. It's green with algae, there's dead fish flowing, there's a bad odor or a smell that comes from the water that is polluted, and it's all because of man's activities. Right, I'm going to revise one more time, and then I'm going to explain a little bit more about eutrophication. Right, effects of water pollution. Remember the diseases, cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. These are waterborne diseases and not airborne. Remember, airborne is pneumonia, bronchitis, emphysema, lung cancer. Those are respiratory diseases. But diseases that come from drinking contaminated water are cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. So in your multiple choice, questions like this can occur, and then you've got to pick up the words that are related to water diseases and then air diseases. Right, diseases, the clogging of the fish, the gills of the fish, the oil on the feathers of the birds, suffocation of aquatic animals by means of plastics, polystyrene, the death of the whales, swallowing plastics, tricking them into feeling full, eutrophication. I'm going to be doing that a little bit more. Affecting the food chains become affected, and the environment of that aquatic or water ecosystem is unattractive. Now let's look at eutrophication. Right, it's a concept that comes out for normally about 3 marks. You need to explain it, and one needs to understand what exactly does eutrophication mean. Right, it all starts off with fertilizers. So the fertilizers get into the water, and then the algae grow rapidly. Once they grow rapidly, what's going to happen? There's a whole lot of algal growth on the surface of that aquatic ecosystem, lake, river, dam, a whole lot of green algae floating. This then blocks out the sunlight. So all the algae on the surface blocks out the sunlight. And then what happens? All the plants at the bottom are now prevented from photosynthesizing. So it prevents photosynthesis for the plants in the lower levels of the water. Now, if the plants do not photosynthesize, you know that there's no glucose. They will eventually die. Lower levels of the water, eventually the plants die. The bacteria that is in the water will decompose them. So they will decompose. And decomposition process, that means the breakdown of those plants, will eventually release carbon dioxide, and a lot of oxygen is going to be getting used up. We're going to see that in some of the questions that we're going to tackle later. So plants die, they will decompose, oxygen is used up, CO2 increases. So all the other fish that was present there now don't have any oxygen available to them. They are now inhaling carbon dioxide. So eventually even the fish die. So oxygen is used up, carbon dioxide increases, and the fish die. So this is the direct, eutrophication is a direct cause of excess fertilizers getting into the river system, and this is the explanation of algal bloom and how it stops photosynthesis, affecting the other aquatic like plant and animal life at the bottom layers of the algae. Okay, so we now go to we're going to look at some of the possible solutions related to water pollution, right? How can we actually prevent our water systems, which add beauty to the environment, how can we actually prevent them from getting polluted further? Or how can we remove some of the pollutants that are there already? Right. We've got to encourage the use of biodegradable detergents to prevent eutrophication. So we've got to use, remember that even some detergents have like phosphates in there. Phosphates to remove stains from your clothing that are found in your washing powders. These detergents are not only going to be friendly to your clothes, but they become completely unfriendly to the environment. They actually change the pH of the environment. They get into the rivers, and these phosphates also increase algal bloom and cause eutrophication. So, but we've got to encourage the use of biodegradable detergents that will be broken down in such a way that they will not become toxic to the environment. Implement strict penalties of fines. Strict penalties of fines on shipping companies, right? Strict penalties and fines on shipping companies so as to reduce oil spills. So there need to be strict fines on those shipping companies that release oil tankers that are not even serviced. So if those tankers are not serviced, or if there's leaks, right, they need to be fined, or heavy penalties need to be imposed on these ships because it causes huge damage to aquatic life. So strict penalties, use of biodegradable detergents, educate. A lot of pollution that is caused by human activities also comes from ignorance. People do not know that if I throw a piece of paper, it will actually land up into the sea and clog the gills of the fish, or it'll block the airways of a whale. They throw the paper without thinking any further. So we need to educate companies that look, the litter that you dispose of is eventually affecting the environment, which eventually will affect human life. So let's dispose of the litter in the proper way. So educate communities regarding health risks from pollution. Now, in the question, they can ask you for listing, say, 3 possible solutions, but you see 6 marks, and you think that no, if I give 1 point, I'll get 2 marks, but it does not work that way. For every point, there has to be a reason. So if you give a statement, give a reason for your statement. So if you say, educate communities, why? Educate communities on the health risks that pollution can cause. Impose fines so that shipping companies can service the oil tankers. Encourage the use of biodegradable detergents so that it does not cause eutrophication in the rivers. So you're giving a statement and you're giving a reason for your statement. Encourage improved agricultural practices. So encourage improved agricultural practices so that the farmer knows he should use contour farming and not grow his crops parallel, whereby all the water washes off the fertilizers into the depth. So if there's contour farming, you find soil and fertilizers will remain on the ground and not wash off into. So encourage agricultural practices to prevent the runoff of soil and fertilizers into the aquatic system. So it's giving a statement and reason. Government to improve sanitation in the poorer settlements. Right. Government is spending money probably on a lot of things that are not necessary, but sanitation in the poorer communities, that needs to be implemented. It's a first priority. So they need to divert money to the poorer communities, implement proper sanitation systems so that there's no need for communities to dispose of sewage into the nearest river or dam. Right. So improve sanitation in poorer settlements to prevent cholera, to prevent dysentery. Right. So these are some of the possible solutions. to water pollution. We now go on to soil pollution. Remember, we said there's 3 types of pollution: air, water, soil. Soil is also called land pollution. We're going to look at now the sources of land pollution, of soil or land pollution. Illegal dumping of bricks and waste. You find as the communities, there's modern technology, right? More homes need to be built. Then you find that people are renovating, getting rid of trees to extend the yard. What do? They get rid of all the old bricks and then find an open field and dump that bricks onto that land, not realizing that there are little animals and plants that are endemic to that area. They are found in that area. They are living. That's their natural habitat. They will be destroyed by that illegal dumping of bricks and sand and bricks and paper and litter and plastics. Right. So illegal dumping is one of the causes of land pollution. It's also completely unsightly. Oil. Oil from vehicles, now not from ship tankers, obviously, from the vehicles. Vehicles that move onto the roads, you find on a rainy day, you see this shimmering oil that is lying on top of the water, on top of the rain. This oil eventually gets into the soil, into the fertile soil, clogs the soil particles, and then you find that water can now no more be held by that soil. Plants can no more grow there. So oil is one of the pollutants of soil pollution. Pesticides and herbicides again. Herbicides are weed killers, whereby certain weeds will infiltrate into the food crops, and then to get rid of it, the farmer sprays herbicides, kills the weeds, fine. But then the herbicides get into the river and dam and they kill the good plants that are around. Sewage. Also, you find that sewage not only gets washed into the river and dam, but it's coming from the land. It's coming from the soil. So humans deposit feces in the nearest felt, and that contributes to soil pollution. Litter. Your KFC packs, Kentucky chicken licken, our plastic bags we buy from Pick and Pay are all contributors. Our cans of Coke contributors to litter that is found on the land. We now look at the effects. What are the effects of these pollutants on the soil? What effects how does all these sources of soil pollution affect humankind, mankind, plants and animals? First of all, it is completely aesthetically unattractive, which means the beauty of the environment is destroyed. It's aesthetically unattractive. Habitat destruction of plants. Habitat means that that little place which was used for probably a mole, which was used for a little bird, has been now destroyed by those bricks that have been deposited over that mole hole. Okay, the habitat destruction of plants and animals. The death of healthy organisms, even the useful bacteria in the soil, gets destroyed by the oil. Okay, oil damages the fertile soil, right? So fertile soil is what? Soil containing humus, which is very good for plant crops and plant growth. These become clogged with oil. So let us look at the 4 effects of soil pollution. The environment becomes unattractive. The habitat of plants and animals are destroyed. Most of the animals will die. And then the oil damages the fertile soil. Also, some animals actually feed on the sewage, right? They feed. The animals don't know what is good and what is bad. So you find that these birds go and feed on the sewage, eventually gets into their system, and the birds die as well. Right, possible solutions to soil pollution. We need to find the people, right? There's certain countries, for example, in Thailand, right? People are actually fined if they are found littering. So if somebody is found throwing out a can out of their car windows, they are fined, right? So this needs to come into our country where fines need to be imposed on people who litter. And then people can be educated not to litter in that way. Because as soon as money is involved, people become wary of the fact that I cannot litter, they wouldn't litter, and our environment is saved. So find people who illegally dump and litter, illegally dump their bricks. Encourage improved agricultural practices. Get the farmers together and give them alternative ways of improved agricultural practices that are friendly to the environment. Government to implement proper sanitation to all communities. Now, when the government needs to implement proper sanitation, remember that is a management strategy. It's not your strategy. Imposing fines is a government strategy. It's a strategy, or it's a management strategy. Fine people, drawing up legislations are all management strategy. Educating people, for example, people are educated on AIDS, right? It's an educational campaign. In the same way, educate people on ways to prevent pollution, right? Educate people on the negative effects of pollution to health of living organisms. And one of the ways is running, for example, educational campaigns on TV, having posters, right, placard demonstration, showing people that they need to save our environment. We are now going to look at some of the questions that tackle the issues that we have discussed, right? Kinds of questions that appear in an exam paper regarding the impact of pollution on environment or on the flora and fauna. Remember, flora refers to all the plant life, flowers and plants. Fauna refers to all the animals, the birds, the insects, the whales, the fish, the penguins, and human are part of fauna. So what we have looked at so far was the impact of pollution on our biodiversity, means the variety of plants and animals that we get in our environment, what impact that pollution has. Now we're going to look at the possible questions relating to that. Right, so let's read. Global burden, okay, let's do that. Okay. Global burden of diseases due to indoor air pollution. Right, now somebody can say, what do we mean by indoor? How can we have indoor air pollution? Remember, in the 1950s and 60s, people never had electric stoves as we have today. People used to use what we call the coal stove, C-O-A-L, coal stoves, where they used to fill coal and they used to cook in there and bake in there and heat their water for bathing. There never used to be solar geysers or electric geysers. So the coal stove was the main form of heating. All right, it was a main form of a heating appliance. Now, in the year 2000, indoor air pollution from solid fuel use. What is solid fuel? It's basically your coal. Remember, liquid fuels are like your petrol, paraffin, right? And gas obviously is a gas, but petrol and paraffin are liquid fuels. Coal is a solid fuel. So they used to use coal. And it was responsible for more than 1.6 million annual deaths. So every year, almost 1.5 million people used to die from indoor air pollution. Smoke and gases that come from the burning of fossil fuels, such as coal, charcoal, and wood. So even wood and charcoal are solid fuels. So the deaths used to come from the burning of these solid fuels in their homes. And they used to use it as a heating thing, to heat the food, to cook the food, to bake, and also to heat their waters. Right. And to cook contributes to the indoor pollution. So as early as 2000 and previous to that, indoor pollution was a major cause of deaths. So please, learners, remember, in an exam you may be rushing for time, but you need to read the extract or paragraph that is given to you. You need to read it because in the paragraph there could be clues for your answers. Right. Dependence on burning fossil fuels to meet their basic energy needs. That means heat energy is required from the coal. It's one of the underlying causes of asthma, bronchitis, pneumonia, and other respiratory illnesses. Other ones mean emphysema and lung diseases. So, dependence on the burning of fossil fuels to meet the basic need. They're dependent on this coal, they're dependent on the wood, they're dependent on the charcoal. Right, and this caused a whole lot of respiratory diseases while they depended on it for the energy. Now the first question. Name three illnesses that are thought to be made worse by exposure to indoor pollution. And as we've learned earlier, so once you know your facts, you apply your facts to that paragraph. You don't just read and not understand. You read, you understand, and then you apply it to the question. Right, name three illnesses. You first look, do I have any illnesses listed in this paragraph? Yes, asthma, bronchitis, pneumonia. So if you take it like that, it will be correct. If you say asthma, bronchitis, emphysema, it's correct. But if you say asthma, bronchitis, dysentery will not be correct because that is a waterborne disease. So it is asthma, bronchitis, and pneumonia. Right. We look at the next question. We look at the next question relating to the same paragraph. Why do you think indoor pollution causes so many medical problems? Right. Why does it cause medical problems? Remember, in the years 1950 to 1960, although there was 1.6 million deaths, it wasn't just caused by respiratory diseases. But when people used to burn coal and they used to add paraffin to the coal, it used to be very flammable. People used to have serious burns, third-degree burns, serious burns. Right. It causes serious burns that come from the burning of coal. Right, remember it's direct flame. So they used to get serious burns. As they used to burn, put the coals in, hot flames, they used to burn. The curtains used to catch on fire probably from the flames. So there was serious burns that come from burning of coal directly. Then remember, all the doors and windows were closed. It's winter time. They are burning the little bolas in their homes, using it as a heater. Right, heat is being released, but once you are in an enclosed room with an indoor open fire, remember that when coal is a solid form of carbon dioxide. So when you're burning coal is actually carbon dioxide. Right, it's a solid form of a fossil fuel, carbon dioxide. When you're burning it in a place where there is a limited amount of oxygen, this coal is burnt to release a gas called carbon monoxide, which is one C and one oxygen atom. That is carbon. Okay. This is, carbon monoxide. Right. So burning coal in an enclosed room releases not carbon dioxide, but carbon monoxide. Now remember that our red blood cells, remember in grade 10 you learned about red blood cells. What do they have? An important pigment called hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin has an affinity to oxygen. But if hemoglobin has a choice to choose between oxygen and carbon monoxide, hemoglobin will choose carbon monoxide. And what does it mean? It means if you inhale carbon monoxide, oxygen will get the second preference. And once the hemoglobin is filled with carbon monoxide, it no longer will carry oxygen. And then if there's no oxygen in your body, cells die. It results in death. So when coal is built or burnt in a closed room, carbon monoxide was inhaled. And this caused the hemoglobin to join with CO2, with CO, right, that's carbon monoxide. And then it prevented oxygen from entering the cells. And you know, if you do not have oxygen for 4 minutes, we can stay without food and water maybe for 40 days, but we cannot stay without oxygen for 4 minutes. So once that oxygen was prevented from entering the cells, it caused death. So you cannot burn an open coal fire in a closed room. It needs to be well ventilated. Allow more oxygen to enter. So the question again was, why do you think indoor pollution causes so many medical problems? Remember, there's direct heat from the flames of the coal, serious burns. Secondly, direct inhalation of carbon monoxide, preventing oxygen, and that causes toxicity, which means it poisons the body itself. Right. So that is for 2 marks, and you get serious burns that come from the burning coal directly, and obviously carbon monoxide is inhaled, resulting in death. Let's look at the next question relating to the same paragraph. Suggest 2 ways in which communities can try to decrease the negative effects of indoor pollution. Now, what could communities do to decrease that indoor pollution? Obviously, up to now, we have people who have little fires, right? Fireplaces in their home, but that fireplace needs a chimney. It needs an outlet. That's one. So you need to have, if there's a fireplace, it must have a chimney outlet to allow smoke and these gases to move out. So fireplace needs a chimney outlet to allow the smoke and the gases to move out. Remember also, indoor pollution causes death because you don't only inhale carbon monoxide, but you also inhale the smoke directly, smoke and soot, which actually blocks the airways. Right. So if you have a fireplace, there needs to be a chimney outlet. The second thing, if you're burning a fire, the area needs to be well ventilated. The doors and the windows need to be open. So the rooms need to be well ventilated. Right, that's the 2 ways. So it needs to be well ventilated. There needs to be a chimney outlet. And also, although they asked for 2, another alternative is encourage people to use solar geysers or wind energy as part of the energy. So they need to use solar heating rather than burning a fire. So encourage safer forms of energy. And that is your solar heating. Right. Although they can even buy electric stoves, but remember they've got to use it wisely, because the more electricity we use, the more coal we're going to use. So we can encourage the use of electric stoves over coal stoves, but also you've got to save electricity. So the best 2 solutions to the communities to reduce indoor pollution will be, the area must be well ventilated. If there's a fireplace, ensure that there's a chimney outlet for gases and smoke, and you encourage safer forms of energy, example, wind energy and the solar energy. Right. The next question, okay. Studies show that the average South African has a carbon footprint. Remember, carbon footprint is the amount of carbon dioxide you use. So if you tell your mom, please put off the light after you've used it, please use a small pot on a small stove plate and not putting a small pot on a big plate where you're actually wasting more heat, electricity. By doing that, you are reducing the carbon footprint that's released into the Earth's atmosphere. Right. So carbon footprint is the amount of carbon dioxide you are responsible for emitting into the atmosphere. Studies show that the average South African has a carbon footprint that is higher than the world average because most of our electricity is generated from the burning of coal. That means in South Africa, most of our energy is dependent on coal, and coal is a solid form of carbon dioxide. So if we depend on electricity, we indirectly depending on coal, and we are producing more carbon dioxide. Increasing the level of CO2 will result in global warming. Now we want to know, how can we reduce our carbon footprint? And one of the most important ways to do this, right, is the first one. Okay. The first one is we have to plant trees. The more trees we plant, the more CO2 is absorbed by the trees and the more valuable oxygen will be released. So we must encourage the planting of trees. And we must discourage the cutting of trees. So we encourage the planting of trees and discourage the cutting of trees. Remember, a tree may take 25 years to grow tall, but you plant one little seedling now, it will take another 25 years to grow, and by that time, more trees are being cut. So the number of trees planted must be more than the number of trees cut down. And that's the only way we can reduce the carbon footprint. So encourage the planting of trees. Right. What is another way of actually reducing our carbon footprint? And that is by saving electricity. Right, you see it on your TV screens. Please use electricity wisely. Right, because the more we save, the less electricity we use, the less coal Eskom is going to burn. So save electricity, because the more we use, the more coal is burnt and the more CO2 is released. So encourage the planting of trees so that the oxygen and CO2 balance will be maintained. There'll be more oxygen than CO2. Save electricity by preventing Eskom from using more coal to be burnt. We now look at the third way of actually reducing our carbon footprint, and that will be discourage the burning of felt fires. Right, felt fires is a major contribution to air pollution in the form of smoke and carbon dioxide. So come winter, people take it upon themselves to start burning felt fires. There is absolutely no need to burn the felt. The felt will dry up, there's no need to burn it and contribute to global warming. So reducing the burning of felt fires, saving electricity, the less we use, the less coal we burn, and planting more trees to increase the oxygen levels and reduce the CO2. So those are the three very important ways in which we can reduce our carbon footprint. We now go to question 2, and this is a data response question where we got to look at the information displayed in the form of a table, or you can even get a graph, and analyze the data before you answer a question. So now let's read the question. Study the table below showing the amount of medical waste produced by 3 provinces over a number of years. Now, if you look at it from our last discussion, I've told you that if you have to plot a graph from a table of data, the first column normally is the data that goes on your x-axis, that is your horizontal axis. And in this case, it's the year. So you've got to put the year as a label and then the 3 provinces, even if you're drawing a bar graph. That's on your x-axis. And then on your y-axis, it's going to be the amount of medical waste and the units in tons, right? Amount of medical waste in tons, and then you've got to plot that data according to the years for each province. So we know that is how you can, a question can come from this. Now let's look at, there are 3 provinces, A, B, and C, over the years 1995 to 2003. So let us say if a graph was asked, you have to draw a bar graph or a line graph, you always need a heading. What would your heading be for a graph, any graph for example? It would be graph, bar graph or line graph or pie chart showing the amount of medical waste in tons in 3 provinces over the years 1995 to 2003. Again, it will be graph showing the amount of medical waste in tons in 3 provinces over the years 1995 to 2003. That heading ensures that you have all the factors captured in your heading, all the data. So it's your dependent variable. Dependent is your amount of medical waste. Remember what I told you last time? That the amount that varies is always your dependent variable. What is fixed and can be controlled is your independent variable. Like it is fixed that I'm choosing just these 3 provinces. I'm doing that survey from this year to that year. That is fixed. But how much of medical waste is produced in each of the years, in each of those provinces over the years, cannot be controlled by the scientist or surveyor himself. So that becomes your dependent variable. So let's look at it now. Which province has shown the most rapid increase in the amount of medical waste produced? So most means you've got to choose from the 3 provinces. Then you've got to look at province A, and you see the highest was 450, right, in province A. Province B, the highest was 330. Province C, the highest was 290. So from all 3 provinces, you see that the highest amount of medical waste in tons was in province A. So it shows you, if you analyze all of them, you'll find, if you take 1995, for example, 1995 province A, you'll see province A had the highest. In 1997, province A had the highest. 1999, province A had the highest. 2001, province A, and then in 2003, province A. And if you look at it this way, you can also see that province A has the highest. So for just 1 mark, it will be province A, and that gives you 1 mark. Right, the next question. What was the percentage increase? Remember, although this is a life science paper, you are required to perform simple mathematical calculations. Okay, you don't need a scientific calculator for life science. A simple calculator will do. Right, what was the percentage increase of medical waste produced by the province named in question 1.5.1 over the period 1995 to 2003? So, what was our answer in 2.1? Actually, it's in 2.1. What was our province? And that was province A. So if you're going to look at the percentage increase, you're going to see that in 1995 it was 357, and in 2003 it was 450. And you're going to do an increase, so you're going to say 450, that was the last year, minus 357, that was at the beginning, and that's going to give you If you work it out, it gives you 93. Right. Now, they want the percentage increase. Percentage is always 100 over 1. So you're going to take the 93. So that gets 1 mark now. For that calculation, you get 1 mark. 93 over 450. Why not over 357? Remember, they want the increase. So you're going to take the bigger amount. So the difference, from the big to the small, the difference over the biggest amount, because it's increase, times 100 over 1. And if you work that out with your calculator, you will get a 20.66, right? Or you can say 20.67% increase. So that is how you work out a percentage increase. It's, if you look at it again, province A, the bigger amount minus the smallest amount from you started, the end and the start, the difference over the bigger amount, which is 450, times 100 over 1 because it's percentage, and your answer needs to be in percentage. If you leave your answer like that, just 20.66 or 20.67, it will be marked wrong. So you get a mark for that, you get a mark for that, and you get a full mark for that. And sometimes if the mark is 4, they give a mark for the answer plus the unit. So please ensure that you put a unit when you're doing any calculation. And if it's a percentage increase, it will be times 100. Increase, you take the bigger amount. Okay, let's go to the next question. Give 2 negative effects of dumping medical waste. Now, you know that children are unaware, but they get fascinated if they have to see syringes and gloves, right? They want to try them on and they want to inject themselves. So this is a big danger to human health, and especially to little children who are ignorant and they go around playing with this medical waste. So what are the 2 negative effects of dumping medical waste? The first thing is that there can be a transmission of serious disease like HIV from the blood of those syringes. If children are playing and inject themselves, HIV can be transmitted to them. So it is the transmission of diseases from used syringes. That is those injections, used syringes. Right, transmission of diseases, example, HIV. Right. Number 2, you find normally medical waste that is dumped is normally incinerated. And we said these are the huge oven-like furnaces which burn down the medical waste. And as they burn in that closed cylinder, toxic fumes are released. So there's an inhalation of toxic fumes that come from the incineration of medical waste. So they burn up the organs, the parts that have been operated and the organs that have been dumped, right? And the decomposing can give a bad odor, right? So the negative effects is the transmission of diseases from the used syringes, and also you find that the inhalation of toxic fumes from incinerating medical waste. Right. Now that is only 2, but I'm going to add a little bit more. Another one can be that some of the medical waste, there can be hazardous chemicals in that medical waste. Maybe there's some injections and some kind of chemicals that they used as in the human body during that operative as a sterilizing agent. These chemicals leak or leach into the soil, into the valuable groundwater. So it is a leaching, that means a seeping. Leaching, okay, it is the leaching of hazardous, that means harmful, hazardous chemicals into soil, which eventually can land up into the aquatic ecosystem. So the leaching of hazardous chemicals into the soil, inhaling toxic fumes from the incinerators, and also the transmission of various diseases that are used when children play with the syringes, example HIV. So that's the negative effects of dumping medical waste. Plus another one could be bad odors. Okay, bad odors from decomposition. Remember, there was an article in the newspaper whereby in a place near Pretoria, right, body organs or parts, if somebody had actually amputated their leg, a leg was thrown as part of the medical waste. And if that leg decomposes, it's going to obviously create a bad odor around that into that community where the medical waste was dumped. So bad odors from the decomposition of medical waste. Right. So these are the 4 negative effects: transmission of diseases, inhaling toxic fumes, leaching of hazardous chemicals, and the bad odors from the decomposition of medical waste. Okay, we now go to question 3, and this question is where a graph is being displayed and you've got to analyze the graph using the data on the graph to answer the questions. Remember, questions such as hypothesis testing can be asked using the graph. Right, so let's analyze the graph. The graph below shows the effect of different amounts of sewage. So the pollutant here is sewage discharged into the river on the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. Study the graph and answer the questions that follow. Graph showing the effect of pollution on the amount of oxygen dissolved in water. So this graph has a relationship between the amount of sewage and its effect on the oxygen consumption, oxygen availability. So there's a relationship between the amount of oxygen and the amount of sewage that is deposited in the river. Now I can make a hypothesis out of this. I can say the more the sewage, the less the oxygen. Another child can say the more the sewage, there's no effect on the oxygen levels. Another one can say the less the sewage, the more the oxygen. So that is a hypothesis. It means that you are predicting what are the results. You are drawing up a relationship between the variables. And what are the variables? Amount of oxygen and the effect of sewage on the oxygen. So it's sewage deposition, that's one variable, and the other one is the amount of oxygen. And which one is the one that's varying? You look at your y-axis and you find that the amount of oxygen is the one that's is changing, so that's your dependent variable. But your stream, your actual stream, okay, the meters down the stream is what we call the independent variable, and the amounts of sewage that is deposited also becomes your dependent variable. We don't know how much. Right, now we're going to look at the first one, and that is mild pollution. That means where there's very little sewage, and then there's a little more sewage, and then there's a lot more sewage. So very heavy pollution means too much of sewage in the river, not so much, and very little sewage, mild. So that is the levels of the sewage pollution. Right. Let's look at the question. Why does the sewage discharge cause oxygen levels to decrease? Now we need to know, what does sewage have to do with oxygen? Remember, sewage is actually nutrients that are released from the digestive system of animals that get into the dams or onto the soil. So it is feces that contains nutrients. It's all dead matter, plant and animal matter that we eat. That is the feces, that is the sewage that comes out of the body, and now it's getting into the river. And then what is going to happen? Remember that our river has useful bacteria. The surface of the water is where there's more bacteria because the waters are warmer on the surface. It's a favorable temperature for bacteria to live in. So the minute, see, the oxygen levels were quite high at that point, but the minute the sewage has entered the river system at that point, when there was mild pollution, after some time, the oxygen began to decrease. So why does the sewage discharge cause oxygen levels to decrease? And that is because the bacteria require oxygen to decompose. So you get a mark for saying that bacteria require oxygen to decompose the nutrients in the sewage. So why does sewage discharge cause oxygen levels to decrease? Because it's the bacteria that's going to use up the oxygen in the river to decompose the sewage. Remember, the bacteria feed on that sewage. So it requires oxygen to decompose the nutrients in the sewage. And there you can get at least 3 marks. But if it's 2 marks, for saying bacteria use up oxygen or require oxygen to decompose, you get another mark. So that is, as long as you have the words that the bacteria require oxygen, or you can say bacteria use up the oxygen, use up oxygen, right, that is where the second mark comes in, right, to decompose the nutrients in the sewage. It's a proper explanation of why oxygen is being used up the minute sewage gets deposited. Let's go to the next question. Right, 3.2. Why does the minimum amount of oxygen occur some distance downstream of the point of sewage discharge? The oxygen level was high, but the minute sewage is released, right, after some time, not immediately, but just a few meters downstream, then the oxygen levels begin to go down. Now they want to know why. Because it starts going down because almost all the oxygen that is available at that point is now used up. So if there's more pollution, the oxygen levels are high, and as more of those nutrients get decomposed, more oxygen gets used up. The more nutrients this is a very steep decline. Remember, that's a gentle decline, steep decline, because in the heavy pollution here and C, remember, more sewage, more nutrients, more oxygen, more decomposition. So this is a very sharp decline in the oxygen level, right? Because lots of oxygen gets used up very, very quickly. So why does the minimum amount of oxygen occur some distance downstream of the point of discharge? Right. All the available O2 gets used up during decomposition. So at that point, all the sewage is now decomposed, and when all is decomposed, at that point, all the oxygen gets used up. All the available oxygen gets used up during the decomposition of sewage. Right, and the mark you get is that all the available oxygen gets used up. Right, and that is why once it gets used up, it begins to decrease, and we're going to see later again why it will increase. So let's go to the next question. 3.3, why does the level of dissolved oxygen in the river then increase again further downstream? Now remember, we've seen that there was this, before the sewage was deposited, the oxygen level was high, and then it slowly began to decrease as the bacteria was decomposed in the sewage. Once all the sewage is decomposed, all the oxygen gets used up. There it decreases some distance downstream. Now they want to know, why does it increase again further downstream? So further down the stream, more deeper into the river, there's more oxygen. And it's obvious that the surface layers of the water, which are warmer, has more bacteria, right? But as we go deeper into the river, it gets colder, and the colder it gets, it becomes unfavorable for bacteria to actually be found there. So the less bacteria, right, the less oxygen will be used up. And remember, there's more oxygen at the bottom. It's naturally aerated from the bottom due to all the aquatic plants. So there's more oxygen at the bottom of the river due to the aquatic plants found in the riverbeds. Right. It's more aquatic plants, more oxygen at the bottom. Remember, it's cooler, there's less bacteria. So why does the level of dissolved oxygen then increase again further downstream? And that is that the lower water levels have more oxygen due to the aquatic plants photosynthesizing. So there's not much plants on the surface, plants at the bottom. Due to the aquatic plants photosynthesizing, that's one. And the second one is that there's less bacteria in the lower levels of the water. That would use up. Right, so the lower water levels has more oxygen due to the aquatic plants that are photosynthesizing, and obviously there's less bacteria in the lower levels of the water, so obviously less oxygen will be used up. That is why the amount of oxygen will increase. Another one, you can also add that there's, by the time the sewage goes downstream, it has already been broken down. So most of the decomposition occurs on the surface, and there's obviously less sewage going down, so there's no need for decomposition. So you can also add there that less sewage would be found in the lower levels of river. Right, there's less sewage because obviously at the top it's already decomposed and broken down. So there's your answers there. It has more oxygen due to the aquatic plants, less bacteria in the lower levels because it's colder, and there's less sewage to be found in the lower levels because most of the sewage is broken down at the upper surface of the river. Right. We go now to 3.4. Give two possible reasons why sewage would be discharged into a river system in a developing urban environment. Now, why will sewage be found in a river? Simple reason is that there's no proper sanitation systems in place in that community. So there's no proper sanitation. That's the first one. Another one could be there is sanitation, but the pipes are not maintained. There's leakage. So poor maintenance of sewage systems cause leakage. Right, causes leakage. So the sewage could leak out into the soil and then wash into the rivers. And you find that the third one will be direct deposit of human feces into river. Right, you find people sit in the river and pass out feces. So they have an intention of passing out the feces in the river directly, or throwing baby nappies into the river with feces. So that is a direct deposit of human feces into the river. The other one is poor maintenance of the pipe, and the other one is there is no sanitation that the government has implemented in that area. We have now come to the end of the session on impact of pollution on the environment and on our biodiversity. Right. Lots of questions come on there. Please remember again that a hypothesis testing is a relationship between two variables. Remember that you plot a graph in the same set of axes. It means 3 graphs plotted on one set and not 2 separate graphs. Always read the paragraphs before the actual table of data or your graph to get maximum marks. Use proper biological terms like imposing fines, maintenance, educational campaigns, right? So these are the words that will actually get you the maximum amount of marks allocated. Right, I hope you've learned a lot. Thank you.